If I don't go out to that crash site, all of the people on that helicopter are going to die. If I do go out to that crash site, all of my men are going to die. Is this worth it? We got hit with all kinds of heavy weapons, rocket-propelled grenades, everything. International news the next day showed American bodies being dragged through the streets. And in war, you have to make a decision. Your decision is going to make life and death consequences, and you don't have all of the information. How could I let them down by not doing what my country's asking me to do now? And now I'll just tell everybody the ugly truth.
Welcome back to the Andy Rowe Show. Jeff Strueker is a former US Army Ranger, best known for his heroics in the Battle of Mogadishu, the mission that inspired the iconic film Black Hawk Down. Strueker was awarded the Silver Star for his actions during the battle. He was also in the invasion of Panama and in Kuwait during Operation Desert Storm. He's a living legend, and he's about to tell his story. Hope you enjoy the episode. This episode is brought to you by AG1. If you're like me and find your morning routine more of a rush than an opportunity to give your body the nourishment that it needs and craves, then AG1 is for you. AG1 is a daily health drink with over 70 vitamins, minerals and other ingredients, including gut-friendly bacteria, antioxidants, high-quality mushrooms and more. I just mix one scoop in with a glass of water and I know I'm giving my body the nourishment that it needs. It takes me less than a minute and it's the least I can do to help myself out. Head to drinkag1.com/Andy Rowe to order now and get yourself a free bottle of vitamin D3 and K2 and 5 free travel packs with your first order. That's drinkag1.com/Andy Rowe. And you'll also be helping out the podcast so I can produce more of this content. Jeff Strueker, thank you very much for coming on the show, mate.
Yeah, man, it's great to be with you.
You drove a Humvee, didn't you? That was your role?
Yeah,
or?
so by the time I'm in Somalia, the movie Black Hawk Down shows me driving a Humvee, but I have a squad of Rangers that are split across 2 Humvees, and really I'm in the passenger seat. I don't argue with the movie. I mean, it's fine. But I'm in the passenger seat and I'm controlling 2 of the Humvees that are in the city streets in Somalia.
So when you say controlling, what does that look like?
That means all of the guns, all of the, leadership on those 2 vehicles, but I also have the responsibility personally of navigating the ground convoy through the city streets. And just to make sure people understand what that means, in Somalia, I don't even know if this is true today. It's probably still true today, but there were no maps. There were no street signs. There's no city planning. So it's just a labyrinth of corners and turns and roads. It's all dirt. There's no identifiable markers. But the only way that we could get around is by taking a satellite photo, a blown up satellite photo of the city and kind of putting quadrants in it. And then I had the only satellite photo in the entire ground vehicles of the entire city. So I'm the guy who has to figure out where we are, where we're going to get to, how do we get there, and how do we get there through this maze of streets and alleys with no markers, no identifiable features. And most of them are, not much wider than the Humvee vehicles that we're driving. So I had to control my men. I had to do all of the navigation, but I also had to lead in the middle of the fight.
What were you doing in Somalia for those people that don't know?
Sure. Yeah. I want to give a little bit of background personally. So for most of the guys that I was with in Somalia, this is their first time in combat. Many of them have been in the Army, U.S. Army for 2 or 3, some of them 5 or 6 years. I've been in the Army for 6 years at this point, but I had already been to war when the U.S. invaded Panama in 1989. I'd already went to Kuwait when the U.S. was involved in Desert Shield and Desert Storm, both of these with the Rangers in 91. So when I got to Somalia in 1993, I had more experience in battle than most guys who had been in the Army for 20 years. We were training in the state of Texas, a huge special operations training exercise, planning for another fight somewhere else in the world. And then we got pulled out of a very small portion of our team got pulled out of that training exercise and sent over to Somalia. And it was a very, very limited package. When I say package, I mean the number of people, equipment, aircraft, vehicles. It's going to be very, very small because and some of your viewers and listeners who were old enough will remember there was a drought in Africa. It affected really about a half a dozen countries: Kenya, Ethiopia, Eritrea, Djibouti, but the epicenter of the drought was Somalia. And if you're old enough, you will remember the concert in England called Live Aid, which was trying to raise money to buy food for the starving babies in Africa.
Was that with Queen and all those guys?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
everybody in the world showed up to Live Aid, and it was, I think, probably one of the biggest concerts in history. And the entire concert was trying to make money for the starving babies in Africa. So the United Nations started trying to hand out food in December of 1992, and they used Somalia as kind of the key location because of its capital city, Mogadishu, located on the Indian Ocean. We can get supplies in and spread out from there and go to, all across the region. The city, Mogadishu, was total chaos. The country was in complete descending into, total unrest. There had been a civil war that had been going on for a long time. And there were some warlords that were basically trying to fight one another to become the country's leader. And in the spring of the next year, so in December of 1992, the United Nations started handing out food, late December. Early in the spring, a couple of those warlords start to target the food distribution sites. And one of those warlords starts to target supply convoys, starts to ambush and murder United Nations workers. I'm in Texas training for another battle somewhere else in the world that might show up. And we get pulled out of Texas and sent over to Somalia because the night before, 24 of the United Nations workers from Pakistan were handing out food in Somalia, and Mohammed Farah Aidid and his Haber Getter clan ambushed and murdered them. Now, what Aidid was attempting to do was to literally starve his country into submission. If I own all of the food, you don't have any choice but to obey me, or else I'll just cut off your food supply and your whole family will die. So the night that he ambushed those Pakistani workers, the United Nations Security Council met, and the Security Council said, "Hey, we've got to do something about Somalia, about Mogadishu, and specifically about Aidid." And so the US threw together this very, very small surgical force to go over there and kill or capture Aidid. Because again, Rangers don't do nation building. Rangers don't hand out food. Rangers go over there to kill people or to blow stuff up. So our mission was to take down Aidid, but not just Aidid himself, but basically to eliminate his entire leadership and make it impossible for them to keep disrupting the food supplies in Somalia.
Can you take us back to October 3rd, 1993? What was the atmosphere like and before the mission and that kind of thing? Set the scene for us.
Yeah, we had already done 6 combat operations, 6 missions in Somalia before this, and each one of them were a little bit more dangerous, a little bit more deadly, but we were being effective. It was just much slower than we expected. We thought we would be over there for about 6, maybe 8 weeks. We're 3 months in, and we still haven't even got most of the top ranking leadership from Aidid's clan. We haven't got number 1 on the list, Aidid. We haven't got the top few guys from his list. And the US president at the time was Bill Clinton. And President Clinton's administration was putting a lot of pressure on us, this small JSOC force, Joint Special Operations Command Force, to get this thing done and to get out of Somalia because the news is every day the news reports are getting worse. So We conducted, we were using some intelligence assets out there, and they identified two really high profile bad guys that were meeting in the same building. Up to this point, we have never seen two high value targets in one place at one time, anywhere in the city. And now, two really high profile bad guys are in the same building, but it's broad daylight. And something that I want to make sure your audience knows is I have almost never, in more than 20 years in the US Army, in special operations, done daylight missions. I've done maybe 1,000 missions at night and less than five during the daytime because our capabilities, our training, our night vision, equipment gives us just a massive advantage. And we started tracking these targets at about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon, October 3rd. But it's broad daylight. And then when we get the confirmation that, yep, they're definitely there, two very high profile guys, and they're definitely in the same building, our big boss, who was a two-star general on the ground in charge of the entire force, he made the decision to launch the mission to go get these guys. And I think all of us knew, okay, this is going to be bad. It's daylight. We're going to have to go into the very part of town that's controlled by ID, which is nothing but guns. As soon as you walk into town, you're going to walk in, or as soon as you get into town, you're going to get in a gunfight the second that you show up. What none of us knew is just how bad it was going to be because no one could anticipate how many bad guys are there. And I'll just give you the end result. When the fight was over the next day, most of us believed there was about 200 of us in the helicopters or on the Humvees in the city that day. And we were probably fighting against 10,000 armed Somalis, and most of it was from across the street to you. Um, yeah. So, what was different about this for all of us, and every one of us knew this going in, is this is going to be ugly. It's going to be really, really ugly because it's the bad part of town, but it's going to be even worse because it's daytime and there's no way around this. You're never going to get a chance to see these two guys in the same building again. So, it's either now or never. And I believe our boss, Major General Bill Garrison, made the right decision when he sent the force in to go get him. I still think it's the right decision. It was just very bloody. And like I said, that's the classic Ranger mission.
When the mission started, what were some of the first signs do you think that the operation wasn't going to go as planned?
Yeah, I I want to say, you've got to be exceptionally well trained. You've got to be, better than any other warrior out there to survive in special operations with the Army Rangers and the guys and gals that we served with. Which means you got to be a little bit cocky. And there's nothing wrong with being a little bit cocky. You also just have to be very realistic. And sometimes you can be so cocky that you're no longer realistic. And I think to some degree, we were cocky and maybe even too cocky in Somalia because what we were expecting is we know we're going to get into a fight. We know it's going to be bloody. Nobody knows how bad the fight is going to be or how bloody it's going to be. But as long as we can get in, do our business, and by the way, the movie's very accurate here. As long as we can get in, get these bad guys, do what we want to do, and get out in less than 30 minutes. What we'd hoped for was 20 minutes. If we can get in and get out in 20 minutes, we're going to take some casualties, but it won't be that many and it won't be that bad. And really, for the first 15 or 20 minutes, almost everything went according to plan until helicopters get shot down. And that's when the whole battle became get to the helicopters and try to save your buddies while the whole city is descending on them. But the plan was we know you're going to get into a fight. Nobody can tell you how bad the fight is going to be. And what was different about this when I showed up with the Humvees is before I even got to my little position, we were already under gunfire. The helicopters were already being engaged by gunfire before they even started putting people in on the vehicle or in the buildings. And so it's immediate. And not only is it immediate, but the fight is across the street from you, which means it's less than 10 meters away. And for the entire rest of the next 18 hours, you're fighting, odds that are 10 to 1 or 100 to 1. And most of the fight is 10 meters away from you.
So you were in charge of leading those convoys in and out. What was some of the things that you, because you're obviously, as you said, you're under heavy fire, overwhelming odds. Can you tell me about what the things that you faced on those runs? Like, what was this sort of situation for you?
So I led the Humvees into the city streets, and our plan was to show up about a half a block away from the Target building. We timed this so that we would arrive with the Humvees when the helicopters were dropping the last few people off, and they would pull off of the Target building, and then they would start to take down the Target building while we waited. And then we thought within just a few minutes, we'll drive up the last half block. Everybody that went in by helicopter will jump on the Humvees and we'll get out of there. And again, I'm the lead Humvee, so I'm going to get everybody into the Target building. I'm going to get everybody out of there. But as soon as I arrived, I was already under gunfire. And then I haven't even been there for 5 minutes when my commander called me on the radio and said, "Hey, Jeff, we had a very seriously wounded Ranger. When the helicopters were going in and the Rangers were going down the ropes, he missed the rope and he fell into the city streets head first. So I need you to get to Todd Blackburn, this injured Ranger's position, and I need you to get him out of here and take him back to our surgeon." Now, I have the only map. I'm the only guy who knows where I'm at in the city. But I told him, "Look, man, I'll get him. I'll get him on a stretcher. I'll get him back to the surgeon. And I think I can get back out here," again, being a little bit cocky, "before the call to get on the Humvees and to exfil or to leave the target." Um, but I had to fight my way up to get to Todd Blackburn, and he was already unconscious. And I'll spare your audience the very graphic, ugly details, but the movie Black Hawk Down shows this very well. While I'm fighting my way back, I come through a crowd of thousands of armed Somalis, and the machine gunner who's sitting right behind me takes a bullet, a heavy weapon, the round from a heavy weapon. He takes one in the forehead. And although he's wearing a ballistic helmet, he gets shot below the helmet and it takes off most of his head. And he's dead before he even hits the ground, the floorboard. And this is just a few moments into the battle. So when I have to make the call on the radio that Dominic Pilla is dead, I tell everybody really in the entire radio network just how violent, how bloody, and how bad this is going to be. Up to this point, I think everybody knew this was going to be bad, but nobody knew how bad. And that was the moment that everybody realized, uh-oh, a lot of us are going to die tonight. That wasn't just a call that Pilla is dead. It was really the call that a lot of people are going to die tonight. And I moved my way back to the base, dropped Blackburn off. I was trying to turn back around and to turn right around to get back out there. And before I could even turn back around, my platoon leader walked up to me and said, "Jeff, we've just had a second Black Hawk helicopter get shot down. We only had a few Rangers left. They were already circling around on a search and rescue helicopter. We put all of them in when the first helicopter crashed. Now we've got another helicopter crashed in the city. So, Jeff, you're going to have to go out to that crash site." And it just became everybody for the rest of the night fighting all night long until 9 o'clock the next morning to get the guys that were pinned down at those crash sites out of the city.
What kept you going back in? Because you were going in and out, weren't you?
Yeah. I'll say this. My men and I went back and forth in and out of the city streets more than one time that night. And eventually I'd drive back out there and stay all night long. And I'm the last Humvee to leave the city the next day. And two things kept me going. One was my faith. I had this very strong, devout faith. I still do. That gave me peace that if tonight's my last night on earth, I know where I'll spend eternity. So I don't have to fear death. But more than anything, my men and the mission is what kept me going. And when I tell when I tell soldiers that are considering Ranger training, that the typical Ranger mission, if you really want to know what it's all about, is a suicide mission, which means a lot of people are going to die. And many of them want to know, well, why would anybody in their right mind sign up for that? And the truth is, you have to believe in something more than yourself, and you have to love someone more than your own life. And I love my buddies, man. I would have gladly given my life for them. And I believed in what our country was asking me to do. And so that's what kept me going on those Humvees. Truth be told, I spent the entire night not thinking about myself. I spent the whole night thinking about my men and just trying to figure out what could I do to try to bring the rest of them home to their families when this battle was over with.
You're going in and out of this gunfight knowing that there's a high chance you're going to be next. How do you, when you see all that happening around you, how do you mentally keep moving forward?
Some guys can't. I don't think that they were prepared for the kind of death they. e- The training that we got as Army Rangers is the best training in the world. It's the most realistic, it's the most accurate, it's the most dangerous training that you can go through to prepare for war. So if you could be trained for something like that, we would have been. But even some of the guys that were trained with me just weren't prepared for it emotionally or psychologically, or I would even add spiritually.
But I wouldn't. Most people wouldn't be. That's the interesting thing about you, Jeff, is that you were, even though there's people that have gone through the same training as you, were not, and I would not be prepared for that. If that, I would like to think I would be, like, but I definitely wouldn't have been.
I'll use a couple of phrases here that are not supposed to be lighthearted, but they're really true. I had an advantage. My advantage was I had already been to war twice. I'd been shot at a lot. I'd moved a lot of body bags. I'd seen a lot of death before Somalia. And most of the guys that were over there were seeing it for the first time. I wasn't. I'd been around it before. So I had a little bit of preparation for that. That's why I mentioned those two other battles. But another thing that helped me is I had already seen the kind of sacrifice that people were making for one another in combat before this. And there was a moment, to be honest with you, Andy, that I really didn't want to go back out there. That I knew, okay, I'm going to get all of my men. It wasn't about me, it was about my men. I'm going to get all of my men killed if I go back out there. And I had to wrestle with this. If I don't go out to that crash site, all of the people on that helicopter are going to die. If I do go out to that crash site, all of my men are going to die. Is this worth it? And that was one of those moments that I just had to decide I can't control what happens next. And it may cost me and all of my men my life, but those guys that are at that helicopter crash site, they deserve a chance to survive. And if there's any hope for them, it's going to be by us getting to them. And I want to make this personal to your audience now. This has nothing to do with the military, nothing to do with the Rangers. There are some moments in life where you are just facing circumstances that are so overwhelming that you don't know what to do next. And that's really where I found myself in Somalia. And in moments like that, I tend to ask, not what do I want to do next, but I tend to ask the question, what kind of man do I want to be in the future? Like when I look back on this day years from now, if I survive, do I want to be the kind of man that rose to the occasion and faced my fears and let God decide what happens next? Or am I going to be the kind of man that runs away from it? And I think that's true for everybody on the planet at certain points in our life where you're going to just be faced with some things and you have to decide what kind of a man or what kind of a woman do I want to be? What do I want my children or my grandchildren to say about me in the future? And whatever that costs, we'll go do it.
I want to go back to, you're back at base. You're in between missions. There was a moment where you had to ask your men to go back in,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
like, given at this point what had gone on in the city, given what was going on in the city, you had two Black Hawks down.
Hmm.
How do you, as a leader, tell your men that they're going to have to go into a situation where you might all die?
There's a great scene in the movie Black Hawk Down that depicts this very accurately. And now I'm going to talk about one of my soldiers because this was probably one of the bravest things I've ever seen a human being do. There's a famous scene in the movie Black Hawk Down where I come back from the base and I'm gathering my men and I'm like, all right, guys, gather around. Mike Durant's helicopter's down. We've got to turn around, get some more ammunition, get some more fuel, get ready to go back out there. And true story, one of my soldiers comes up to me after I get done briefing everybody and says, hey, Sergeant, I can't do it. I can't go back out there. Now, his name is Brad Thomas. And Brad and I have talked about this several times since then. But Brad and I were the only soldiers in my squad who were married. And Brad started to say, I know if I go out there, I'm going to die. And my wife is going to be a widow. And Brad wasn't saying, I'm scared. Brad was saying, there's got to be a different way. It's going to cost us as many or more lives to go save the crew at the helicopter as we're going to rescue. Why would we do it this way? And I pulled him off to the side and I tried to reassure him. And I basically said, Brad, if there was any other way, man, I would have already done it. But I don't want you to think about yourself as a coward. Now, this is what this part of the scene is what really happened. This part of the scene from the movie Black Hawk Down is what really happened. I just simply said, Brad, all of us are going through fear right now. I feel it just like you do. But the difference, and I really meant these words, I still mean them today. The difference between a hero and a coward is not the feelings of fear, it's what you do when you face fear. If you let the fear overwhelm you, and if you cause it to make you quit, then you're a coward. But if you're willing to just stand up and not knowing the outcome, face your fear, then no matter what happens next, Brad, you're a hero. And I will tell you that Brad Thomas is to this day one of my greatest heroes because after I said that to him, he grabbed his weapon and he got back on the vehicles with me. And for the entire rest of the night, in Brad's mind, he had already settled, I know I'm going to die. And I know I'm going to leave my wife a widow. But the people in that helicopter crash site, they deserve a chance to live. And so I'm going to go out and give my life so that they can live. And man, to be able to serve with, let alone to be able to fight next to warriors like Brad Thomas is probably one of the greatest privileges of my life.
Okay, so then you all get in the Humvee and you're heading back into the battle. What's going on inside the Humvee at that point?
So here's the chaos of the next turn into the city. We didn't know exactly where the crash site is. Remember, there's no maps. So they take my satellite photo and they kind of put their finger on the photo and say, we think it's somewhere in here. We don't know exactly where. And Jeff, we need you to get to that crash site, but there's no way to tell you exactly where it is. We've already been on target now for about an hour. Maybe it's 4:30, 5 o'clock, but we've already been out there fighting for about an hour. And it looks like if we can get to the crash sites quickly and we can get all of our buddies out, we can get this thing done before the sun goes down. So the guys that are in the air in a helicopter, in our command and control helicopter, they give me their frequency and they say, Jeff, turn your radio to this frequency. You can talk to the helicopter in the air. He will give you directions. He'll tell you where to turn because I don't know exactly where I'm going. I've got some Humvees behind me, but I don't know where I'm supposed to go to. I just have a general idea in the city. So the Humvee or the helicopter is giving me directions and we're going through roadblocks. We're going over debris. They're burning tires to keep us from being able to drive down the road. And the helicopter says, hey, Jeff, there's some burning tires down the road in front of you. If you make a right turn at the burning tires, you'll go to the crash site. Now, all of us already know in Somalia, with no electricity, there's no radios, there's no television. So there's no way to communicate with each other. And the Somali warlords use burning tires. They could see the black smoke through the whole city during the day. You could see the flames at night. And the burning tires were the warlords signal to their men, this is where the battle is, come to the burning tires. And everybody just grabs their gun and runs to the burning tires. So what the helicopter couldn't see because they were flying in the air was before I got to those burning tires, there was about a dozen Somalis hiding in the bushes waiting for me. And when I got right next to them, they ambushed my Humvee. And I mean, from just a couple of meters away, 2 meters away, we got hit with all kinds of heavy weapons, rocket propelled grenades, everything. And I had to back my way out of that ambush, try to fight my way around the city, met up with other rangers that were already dead and hanging off of the sides of their vehicles, and drive them back to the base, drop them off. And now I'm trying to turn back around, and they come running out and they were like, "Stop, don't go back out there. These Humvees are just made out of fiberglass and aluminum. And the bullets literally are going through one door and out the other. We can't keep sending the Humvees out there." So my boss, the commanding general, asked the United Nations to help out. And the Malaysians came with their armored personnel carriers, and the Pakistanis showed up with two of their tanks, and another US Army unit showed up at our base. And it took us until about 11 o'clock at night for us to get this big convoy put together. And we drove back out there and stayed out there in this big multinational convoy until 9 o'clock the next morning, when we could get to all of the crash sites and recover all of the bodies. But my men and I stayed on the same two Humvees. We were just sandwiched between armored vehicles, and stayed on those vehicles all night long. Unfortunately, we never made it to Durant's crash site. And for your listeners, will many of whom, if they're old enough, they'll remember the news, international news, the next day showed American bodies being dragged through the streets, showed soldiers being, their bodies being mutilated and desecrated right there in the London Times, right there on BBC for everybody in the world to see. And those all came from Mike Durant's crash site that I never made it to. And to this day, I feel somewhat responsible for not getting to that crash site before it was overrun by Somalis and everybody was killed and their bodies were taken and dragged through the streets and mutilated on the international news for the world to wake up and see the next morning.
Wow, that's heavy. That's a heavy burden for you to take. I mean, no one listening to this would for a second think that you were somewhat responsible. But there were a couple in the movie. There were a couple of snipers that dropped out of the chopper. One of the choppers that didn't get shot down to rescue the guys at the crash site as well. Is that a true story? Is that what
Yeah,
happened?
true story. So what they were supposed to do is just buy time for me and the Humvees to get there. And they kept asking, when are the Humvees going to get there? When are the Humvees going to get there? And the answer kept being, I don't know. They're on the way. They'll get there when they get there. They're doing the best they can. And repeatedly, I think 4 or 5 times, these two snipers, Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart, said, "Hey, put us in and let us go to the crash site and hold the crash site until the Humvees get there." And on like the fourth or the fifth request to go on foot, finally the commanding general said, "Look, I want to talk to these two guys personally." And so he said, "I want to make sure you know what you're asking. I don't know when those Humvees are going to get there, and you might be overrun by the enemy. Are you aware that you are asking me to put you in against hundreds or thousands of Somalis?" And they said, "Yeah, we understand." And so he gave the permission for the helicopter to land, and those two guys moved on foot to the crash site. And the whole idea was they would just wait for me to arrive with the Humvees. And those two guys, of course, were killed. Their bodies were being dragged through the streets, but the US gave them our version of the Victoria Cross. Those two warriors received the Medal of Honor for what they did. And quite honestly, they deserved it. Um, and again, if I would have made it to the crash site, I think those two guys would be alive today. But unfortunately, I didn't make it, not in time anyway.
How do you how do you process that? Like now that you talk about to this day, you're still feeling somewhat responsible for it. Like how do you mentally deal with that
Yeah.
afterwards?
I think all of us that have been to war, not just Somalia, but I'm talking about all of my very close friends from the British military that were fighting next to me in Iraq and Afghanistan. And by the way, we've had other countries that showed up and supported the United States after our country was attacked on September 11th, 2001, but none of them were brothers and sisters in arms like our friends from the British military. Um, there were not many targets that I was on that I didn't have a commando from the British military right next to me or closely around me. And anybody who's been to war knows hindsight is 2020, right? After the fact, you learn a whole bunch of details that you didn't know during the fact. And in war, you have to make a decision. Your decision is going to make life and death consequences, and you don't have all of the information. And by the way, most of the time, you have about a half a second to make that decision. I think a lot of guys that have been to war, they still struggle with the decisions that they made. But if you've made the decisions for the right reasons, I'm not just saying the right decisions, but the decisions you made were for the right reasons, I think they're easier to deal with. I think you sleep better at night knowing I made the decision for the right reason. I didn't have all of the details, but what I did have, I made for the right reason. I can never forget the families. Man, it was an honor to fight next to guys like Brad Thomas, Gary Gordon, Randy Shugart. I'll take that honor with me to my grave, but I can never get out of my mind the families that'll never see their daddy or their husband again because of decisions that I made. But I also realize that's part of being a warrior, and there's no way to. That comes with the territory. There's no way to be a warrior and not have to make life or death decisions. And if you make the decisions for the right reasons, you can sleep with yourself at night.
Some of those decisions that you're making that carry such a heavy burden and that you're making in a split second. How do you do that when you're under intense fire? You've got because your fight or flight kicks in. Your natural instinct would be there's someone shooting at me in that direction. I'm going to go in the other direction. That's how a normal person would make the decision. How do you make your decisions?
Well, again, keep in mind that the Rangers and commandos, they get this unprecedented, realistic training, dangerous training. I mean, before Afghanistan and Iraq, I lost far more of my buddies in training, many more in training than in combat, because we did dangerous training and we did it every day. And all of us knew tomorrow I might die on a training mission. But if we're going to be able to do the kind of work in battle that our country needs us to do, we have to be able to do dangerous stuff in training. So part of it is it's conditioned, right? Like I have to make decisions, even in training, I have to make decisions, and I'm going to do everything I can not to cause somebody their life, but tonight might cost somebody their life. That's part of it. But the other part of it is I have this, you know, system that I decide I am not going to let fear take over and I will not make a decision just to save my own life. Whatever I decide next, it may cost me my life, but it will be the right decision for the right reason. And I will gladly die making the right decision than make the wrong decision just to save my own skin. Andy, I don't think you can get there easily, but I do think you can train warriors to the point that even if it costs you your life, you're going to make the right decision and you're going to do it in a split second time because somebody else's life is not less valuable. My life is not more valuable than theirs. And so, whatever is going to accomplish the mission tonight, whatever it takes, no matter how much the sacrifice, that's what we're going to do tonight.
You talk about the snipers pretty much doing exactly what you just said. Were there other times on the battlefield where people made decisions and you could visibly, like if you were sitting back, you were thinking that guy's making a decision that's going to potentially more than likely cost him his life, but he's doing that for me or he's doing that for those guys.
Yeah. I'll tell a story of a guy that I have. Man, he just blew me away in Somalia. But I want to go back and remind your listeners of something you said a few minutes ago. I struggle, but I try to put myself in the mind of those rangers on the boats as they're approaching the beaches in Normandy and getting ready to climb those cliffs. And as they're standing at the back of that, at the bottom of that 30-meter cliff, 40-meter cliff, knowing there's nothing but Germans and machine guns at the top. And most of us are going to die before we even get to the top. And when we get to the top, now we're totally surrounded and completely outnumbered. And they're climbing up. They can't even put their weapon, they can't even use their weapon while they're climbing. So they're climbing with their dagger in their teeth. And I've often thought to myself, what moved those men up those cliffs? And the truth is, what moved them up there is something was more valuable to them than their own life. And their buddies to the left and to the right, and the future of freedom for Europe and for the world was more valuable to them than their own life. Most of those guys died climbing the cliffs. The overwhelming majority of them died climbing the cliffs. And so when I'm in Somalia, I'm thinking there's been a lot of Rangers before me that have done this or worse. And how could I let them down by not doing what my country's asking me to do now? That's part of what motivates me. But the other part of what motivates me is the love of my buddies. And I mean, I use this word love very intentionally. I love those men in many cases more than I love my own life. And if tonight I have to die so that they might live, I'm willing to do that. I'm more than willing to do that because I recognize that's what I signed up for when I became a U.S. Army Ranger.
What happens when, so 9 o'clock the next morning, the multinational force has gone in there, the Pakistan army has come in with their armored tanks, and you guys have extracted everyone, got as many, some people didn't make it out. What happens when you get back to base at that point? Like,
Yeah. Forgive me, by the way, I forgot to tell you about John. True story, John Mesa Hunis. So we drive back out on the city streets. It's about 11 o'clock at night. I'm in the two Humvees, shot to pieces. I've got Malaysian armored personnel carriers and Pakistani tanks around me. And I've got this commando on the back, this special operations Army, U.S. Army special operator on the back of my Humvee named John Mesa Hunis. And John is just jumping on the back and he's like, Jeff, I need a ride. So we get out there and we're on the city streets and we've separated the two crash sites. So there's one crash site to the north, one to our south, and we're in the middle. We've already got Rangers that have made it on foot to the crash site to the north, but nobody's made it to Mike Durant's crash site to the south. And John comes up to me with his just by himself, and he says, "Hey Jeff, I'm out of here. Don't wait for me. I'll find my ride on the. I'll find my way back on my own." And I'm like, "Hold on just a second, John. First of all, nobody does that in war. Secondly, what do you mean you're out of here? And third, where are you going to get a ride back?" And John says, "I'm going on foot by myself to that crash site to see if anybody's alive." Now, it's almost midnight at this point. But John Mesa Hunis, by himself against thousands of armed Somalis, makes his way to the crash site. And he's the guy who confirms to our big boss, yeah, there's no bodies left here anymore. I'm at the helicopter. There's nothing but blood and weapons, but all of the bodies are gone. They've already been taken away from the crash site. And John Mesa Hunis did that on foot. Man, I'll just be honest. I don't know what kind of courage it takes for a guy to be able to move on foot against an entire armed city just to be able to get there and confirm, yes, there's no American bodies left here anymore. But wow, being around guys like that blows my mind.
there were 4 Medal of Honors awarded during that battle, wasn't there?
Well, there were two, and it was those two snipers that went on foot. There were a whole lot more that I think did close to what a Victoria Cross Medal of Honor should merit. But certainly Gary Gordon and Randy Shugart stand above them all.
You got a Silver Star, didn't you?
Yes, sir.
And that's the level one. That's is almost a Medal of Honor. That's the one
Yeah,
below.
there's two awards below the Medal of Honor. This is the second below it. There's a cross, Distinguished Service Cross, between the Medal of Honor and the Silver Star. There's a whole the U.S. military is crazy about their awards. You know, they go overboard with it, but this one is up at the top.
That's amazing. I mean, that's what Captain Winters got on D-Day.
That's right.
Like
Yeah, yeah,
you've got to do something extraordinary
yeah.
to have that award. That must have meant a whole lot to you. I know
It
you're
did.
probably going to give me some story about how it would, the people in the ground were the heroes that didn't come back, and you're right, but to get a Silver Star, it's that you have to have done something extraordinary.
Yeah. The 19-year-old kid on top of my Humvee who was operating the 50 caliber machine gun all night long received the Silver Star, and I believe that that young ranger who was just in high school a year earlier deserved more than I got because he was wounded multiple times and shot and still stayed on that machine gun and wouldn't leave even when he was wounded more than once, and stayed up there on top of that Humvee all night long and wouldn't give his gun up. But that's just the heart and soul of an American Ranger right there.
So he was a 19-year-old kid and he is on your machine gun the whole
And I kept
night.
thinking to myself, he was just at his school dance 12 months ago, and now he's up here being shot to pieces and won't quit.
My goodness. It's that it what do you what do you wish that people understood more about the what happened in Mogadishu? Because it's a long time ago now that I
Yeah.
mean there's the movie, I mean there's you probably from my perspective it's all the details, there's a lot of details out there, but I'm
Yeah.
guessing you sometimes might sit there and go, I wish people knew a little bit more about this part of it.
Yeah. So the first thing I want to say is it really wasn't that big of a thing in the global scheme of things. It was just a very bloody, very ugly fight, and that happens in war from time to time. But secondly, what I wish more people saw was what was in the heart of the guys that I served with. What the movie and the book told is the actions, but you it's really hard, almost impossible to put onto the pages of the book or onto the screen in the movie theater what was in the heart of these guys that caused them to do that. And I think what was in the heart of those Rangers has been true of warriors from all over the world who love freedom and are willing to lay down their life for their country and their future. That same thing has been in the heart of warriors for thousands of years. And I wish more people could see the heart of my buddies, not just the buddies that were killed there, but the ones that survived it as well.
And for you, how have you changed? Like just to finish things off, like what sort of impact has that had on you long term?
I think the best way to answer that is to say, how hasn't my life changed? Um, Almost every bit of who I am has been impacted by what I went through in Somalia. But I want the audience to know in a lot of cases it's been impacted for in a good way. Like I'm a much better man, but a much different man because of Somalia. My wife and I were school sweethearts. We met before I joined the military. And she would tell you, Jeff is a very, very different man than I met and I married. And Somalia did that. It changed him. In many, many ways, it changed me for the better. But in some ways, it changed me that I can never, ever go back to. And I wish I could go back to the guy that I was in Somalia. But after the death, after all of the suffering, and I'm not just talking about our killing and our suffering, but the suffering that I saw the Somali people do, after all of that, it's left an impact on me. And I think war is supposed to do that to people. So I've had thousands of warriors come up to me after they've been in battle for the first time because they all know that I'm the guy from Black Hawk Down. And they've said, hey, I need your help. I can't sleep or I can't deal with the nightmares or I'm struggling, getting a peace of mind after what just happened to me. And then they ask me the same question. How do I make it go away? How do I go back to the guy I was before that battle? And I'm unfortunately the person that has to tell them, you can never go back. You can go forward and you can even have a better and a stronger future, but it's impossible to go back and don't even try. Because if it were possible, I would have done it. It just can't be done. War is supposed to change somebody, and it doesn't always have to change you for the worst, but it will change you, and it's impossible that it doesn't.
What are you doing now? So tell me a little bit about what you're up to and where people can find out more information about what you're doing now, Jeff.
I did almost my entire Army career with the US Army Rangers. I did it almost all in the same US military base. It's called Fort Benning, Georgia. And I retired there. And I retired there, even though my wife and I come from the middle part of the United States, we stayed here in Georgia so that I could stay connected to warriors. And I spend 2 or 3, sometimes 5 or 4 or 5 days a week on the military base, and I spend time talking to warriors, the future generation of warriors, and just passing on advice and answering their questions and teaching them. But Somalia, God used Somalia to move me in a very different direction. And after that battle was over with, I eventually became a minister, became an army chaplain. And after retiring from the army, started a church close to Fort Benning, Georgia, so that we could stay connected and I could stay around warriors. And what I tell people is I'm attempting to touch the soul of the United States Army. That's my goal in life. With whatever days I have left, I want to use all of my time and all of my energy to strengthen the soul of the US military and especially US Army Rangers. So that's what I do today. You can see behind me, we started a ministry just for that purpose. It's Jeff Strueker Ministries. And what I try to do with all of my time and energy is to use it to strengthen the soul of a warrior before they get to battle. Because it's really, really hard to address the soul after it's been in battle and come home, changed and something bad happened to them or they did something bad in battle.
Jeff, thank you so much for coming on the show. Honestly, it's been my absolute privilege to share a conversation with you, and thank you so much for your service. What you did and what you continue to do is nothing short of incredible.
Well, it was an honor to be asked to come on the show. But again, one of the reasons I wanted to be on your show is just so that I could say to your listening audience, man, I am indebted to those British commandos that were with me in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I love those guys like brothers. So, what an honor to be able to tell your audience how amazing they are.
And thank you very much for listening or watching this. Make sure you hit the subscribe button and give us a share on social media as well. We'll be back again with another episode